Hello and welcome to the Navel Gays, a podcast about autosexuality. My name is Tali Botts and this is my co-host Aaron Terrell. And today we are doing a first for the content on the Navel Gays podcast, and we're doing a reaction video. So we're gonna spend today's episode watching a recent episode of the Gender A Wider Lens podcast. This show is hosted by Stella O'Malley and Sasha Ayad, who are both gender therapists, youth gender therapists who work with parents and children alike. Stella is the founder of GenSpect as well. And their most recent episode of the podcast was with Dr. Hakeem, and Aaron and I were obviously immediately interested in this episode because of the title and because of the content. We get excited anytime we see clinicians talking about autogynephilia in the public. But we found this information to ultimately be a letdown. So much so that we decided to react to it here. And so, just kind of putting it out there, Wider Lens, we are definitely fans of that podcast. Both Aaron and I have been guests on the show, and we really respect the years of work that Sasha and Stella have put into this topic, this debate, and actually working directly with kids, with parents, with trans adults. But we want to talk about what we see as some of the obfuscation of autogynephilia and the obfuscation of the motivation for transition. What is underlying the dysphoria that is commonly pushing people towards a medical pathway? And so Aaron and I are going to watch the whole episode, but before this comes out for you guys, we will have edited out the pieces of the episode that maybe aren't relevant or that we haven't reacted directly to. So what you guys will see are our reactions and the segments of the episode that are relevant. And yeah, let us know in the comments what your thoughts are, and we will we'll link over to the full episode of Gender A Wider Lens so that you guys can watch it on your own and make your own conclusions and judgments about the conversation. All right.
Yeah, let's do it.
Let's get started.
Yeah, so just briefly, Dr. Hakeem is, of course, a distinguished psychiatrist and psychotherapist. He has an extensive career spanning over 2 decades. He was educated at the Rydal School and University College London. He completed his medical and psychiatric training at top London and Glasgow hospitals. He's a fellow of the Royal College of Psychiatrists and has specialized in forensic psychiatry and psychotherapy. He's a patron of the LGB Alliance and a member of the Clinical Advisory Network on Sex and Gender, which is CAN-SG. And of course, he's the author of 2 books, Trans, Exploring Gender Identity and Gender Dysphoria, which was from 2018. And his latest book, which he highly recommends, almost as us, he recommended it above his first book. He said he was much more bold in the Detrans book, which was nice to hear. And he made fun of me for being unable to produce a copy of it on command, as Stella had, called Detrans When Transition is Not the Solution, published in 2023. So we hope you enjoyed this conversation. But we wanted to ask you about, you've obviously got some ideas about categorizations and how to really understand the variation within populations of people who choose to transition and then, of course, detransition. So what have you learned, and what can you tell us about people who detransition?
Well, before the detransition, let's talk about the transition. So I had a unique experience in that for the time I was running my specialist gender dysphoria adult psychotherapy service, I was seeing people for an hour or an hour and a half if they're in a group every week, some of them for over 10 years. So this is more clinical contact than any other clinician would have had with them before or subsequently, and probably more clinical contact with anyone with gender dysphoria that anyone's had really in this country. And what became clear was that whilst each person may present saying, I'm the wrong sex, I need to have a sex change, what became clear was that there were distinct categories. And we previously knew that these distinct categories existed, but now they're all called trans, which is really confusing. So you have one group, which are the transsexuals, and these are the people who believe or buy into the belief that they should be the other sex. And they're a small number of people. Then you've got a huge number of people, which are what we call transvestites. And they know deep down that they're not the other sex, but they get something out of dressing up. And you can divide them into the fetishistic transvestites and the non-fetishistic. The non-fetishistic, they get some reward from dressing up. So classically, Mervyn Glasser, in his 1977 paper, Analysis of a Transvestite, he talked about the young boy who'd grown up with a smothering, overpowering, claustrophobic mother. And then by triumphing over her, he could put his mother on and take his mother off at will. So that was his way of overcoming the trauma. And all perversions have a root in trauma. So the trauma of the smothering, suffocating mother was overcome by putting on and taking off mother at will. The external female vestiges, the trans vestiges. And then for those of them who get sexually turned on, they would do that and they'd masturbate while doing it. So they needed their penis in order to masturbate. They had no intention of getting rid of their penis. And then there's another group, which is very, very small, which are the autogynephiles, the AGPs. And what's clear from looking at gender critical Twitter, for example, is that lots of gender critical people confuse fetishistic transvestites with AGPs. And everybody now who's wandering around in lacy underwear as a man on the street is called an AGP, but they're not. The AGP, the autogynephile, is a man who is sexually turned on by the idea of having female genitalia and breasts. So it's nothing to do with dressing up. So they're the ones that are fantasizing and getting turned on by the idea of having a vagina and breasts. The people that you see wandering around in various states of, Ann Summers garb in the streets and trying to get into women's spaces and getting really excited by it, they're the fetishistic transvestites. For them, the fetish is being in a woman's space, whether that's her clothing, her spaces, and Jermaine Greer talked about it as almost like a rape, and you can think of it as a societal rape, because they're not getting inside the woman, but they're getting inside the woman's space, and they're determined.
Okay, Aaron, I'm ready to react already.
Let's
start with one point of agreement. I agree with Dr. Hakeem that the gender criticals don't understand autogynephilia. And that, so far, is my only point of agreement with Dr. Hakeem.
So I definitely agree there. I'm glad that we kind of played this much because he's already laid out kind of our fundamental disagreement, though, with him is, well, I'm not even sure that I do disagree with conceptualizing fetishistic transvestism, and what he's referring to as AGP is strictly anatomical AGP. It's like those with severe dysphoria about their male genitals, body, etc. That's who he's saying are the AGPs, and this is distinct from the fetishistic cross-dressers. And I think there is a very good argument to be made there. It's just that the original definition of autogynephilia, as put forth by Ray Blanchard, included, all those types. These various. He's going to go on to say how he's got he created 11 different classifications of fetishistic transvestites, and then I think AGP is distinct from even those 11 categorizations. Anyway, we'll get into that part, but there seems to be he seems to not be actually familiar with Ray Blanchard's original theory, the original literature from the populations that he observed, and instead, as has developed his entire theory, his entire framework, strictly based on the patients that he saw, and without really consulting, the other patient presentations, what's available online now. It just seems like he just created it in his own practice's echo chamber. I don't know.
Yeah, I have several frustrations with so far. I agree with you that there are meaningful differences between the AGP and the AGAMP experience, right? We had Annie and Ray on to talk about that. I think you and I might have slightly different concepts of like how separate those groups are, what the overlap is. But yes, I agree with you. Like he is correctly observing patterns and some distinctions, but he's trying to make it way too neat in a way that doesn't, that is not true. It is not manifest in reality. I agree with you. The main thing is that he's using the word autogynephilia without any grounding in the theory of autogynephilia.
Right.
And so he is, like you said, he's using it to mean this one subtype of dysphoria, basically, of anatomic autogynephilia, which I think Sasha points out directly a little later in the episode, so we will get there. And then he makes that distinct between the fetishistic transvestites and the non-fetishistic transvestites. I don't think those differences are meaningful. I think that there are fetishistic transvestites, quote unquote, like Ray, let's use our friend Ray as an example, who both their interest is sartorial, their interest is in the clothes and the aesthetics, but it's also in the physical body. Ray wanted breasts. And again, especially if we're talking about AGAMP, it is the morph of the male and female body that is the sort of erotic ideal. And so that does include breasts, and for some agamps it includes whether or not desiring a vagina exactly. It's not this idea that transvestic fetishists always want to keep their penis because there's always going to be some masturbation ritual at the end. Is just not accurate. It doesn't seem to be true for people that we know, certainly, and the people that Dr. Blanchard was seeing at his clinic in the 80s when he coined the term autogynephilia. I also I don't appreciate this notion that he said so very casually that all perversions are rooted in trauma.
Yep. Sorry. What do you mean by perversion? Like,
Yeah, right, exactly. What do you mean by perversion? But also, we just don't have any evidence for this. And, I can make an impassioned plea, but I think, frankly, Dr. Bailey does a better job of it on Ray's interview with him. Maybe we'll link that down below, too. But honestly, I think Dr. Bailey would have a field day with this episode. Because this idea that it is even the example he gave, like a classic example of the non-fetishistic transvestite, is the poor young boy with the overbearing mother who turns to transvestism so that he can put on his mother and take her off at will. And how is that not like complete psychoanalytic BS? And that's where I think you're even being a little too generous, Aaron. I don't think he's just I'm sorry, but I don't think he's only basing his views on what the populations that he's seeing, but he's also basing it on his psychoanalytic assumptions. And I think in Dr. Bailey's recent article in Reality's Last Stand, which maybe we can link to that too, he does a really good job breaking down why that's not an effective way to ascertain the motivations of transsexualism in particular, but many psychological and mental woes in general. I just think he's made just a bunch of claims without any supporting evidence, and he's trying to draw the lines between, as far as I can tell, people we should have sympathy for, which is the traumatized, non-fetishistic transvestites, the evil, dangerous, fetishistic transvestites, and then
who are committing social rapes.
Who are committing... Yeah, I'm going to get to that. Committing social... Thank you. Who are committing social rapes. And then the AGPs, who I guess we're just supposed to think they're strange. Like, in some ways... He's at least not painting them as the evil boogeyman.
It's almost like his framework is like kind of making AGPs much more sympathetic, which is interesting. Usually, people who rewrite Blanchard's autogynephilia for their own political reasons make it much worse. But he's actually making the real AGPs into the much more sympathetic characters in this.
No, I think that's true. Although again, there's just major holes there because first of all, we know that lots of AGPs don't get rid of their penis. Okay.
Yep.
They for many reasons, many of them good reasons, even if they have that desire to do so, many of them just make the conscious decision that it's not worth the risk or for what or that it's going to limit their dating pool. There could be various reasons why people make this decision. But also this idea that he sets up for the pushback that a lot of anti-AGP people will make, which is like, well, if it was erotically motivated, then why would they ever get rid of their penis? And so he's able to say, well, these cross-dressers, it's sexual for them, right? And they're the social rapists. But the AGPs, he's saying it's sexual for them. He's saying they are aroused and turned on by the thought of having breasts and a vagina. Well, wouldn't that be challenged by the introduction of anti-androgens and estrogen? He doesn't seem to deal with that contradiction at all. So that's frustrating. Yeah, and then this social rape thing. That's That's really strong language, and I don't know how helpful it is to the conversation, to the political discourse here. But I guess I want to say, to a certain extent, he's right. And what I mean by that is, it's a common talking point of like, trans people just want to live their lives. They don't care what anyone else thinks about them or sees them as. This is just for themselves. And while this is partially true, and certainly more true for some people than others, part of it is being seen by others as the opposite sex. Now, do I think that constitutes involving strangers non-consensually in a fetish? No. But part of it is absolutely being accepted as a woman, being perceived as a woman. And so do I think that most AGPs or transvestic fetishists, as he says, do I think that most of them are literally getting off by violating women's boundaries by going into women's spaces? No. I don't think for most of them that it is a masturbation ritual to go into a women's knitting group. However, it is part of the AGP psychology to be accepted in women's spaces as a woman. Now, this is very conflicting for many AGPs because many of them both want to experience this and see a man invading women's spaces as the most horrifying, misogynistic thing that someone could do. And so I just think it's way too simplistic to try to paint this brush as like everyone who's a cross-dresser basically is getting a thrill on specifically violating the boundaries of women. Even if boundary violation is the result, it's not the motivation for many of them. And I think that distinction matters.
It definitely matters. It matters a lot. And also what matters is I don't think that this classification or this, exists in his framework. But for many, their autogynephilia is interpersonal and behavioral. And so this would even better fit into his categorization of this, what I'll call a boundary violation. It seems more appropriate language, is those who want to be in women's spaces for the validation of their womanhood amongst other women. And it's being around the other women and included with the women. That is what is, that's kind of the basis of their autogynephilia, is that, social inclusion and womanhood. And
that's a very good point. Sorry, I just want to interrupt you there. It goes against what he said. It partially goes against what he's saying. And again, are there some people with comorbid personality disorders or other paraphilias that turn this into very antisocial behavior? Yes, obviously. But you're right. The interpersonal and behavioral autogynephile wants to be accepted by women as a woman. They get nothing out of being seen as a perverted man entering women's spaces.
Right. Or domineering the space. Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Yep.
Yeah. Sorry, I cut you off. I don't know if you had a finishing thought there.
No, that was essentially it. Just it's weird. They go into the autism thing, but it's like I almost feel like he has these very really rigid, like there's this kind of AGP, this kind of AGP, or not, or transvestic fetishist, this one, without any knowledge that these are very, very fluid and spectrumy, experiences, and people fall, I don't know. I guess I'm jumping ahead to other things, but
no, you're right. And it's actually, when you put it like that, what this is actually is just a step backward, because the types that he is delineating have been observed by sexologists going back 100, 150 years.
Right.
The reason that Blanchard's work was so noteworthy and meaningful in the field is that he, in running statistical analyses, saw that these experiences clustered, right, around one thing. And so, yes, you still have these sort of distinct presentations within the umbrella term of autogynephilia. So Oz is not making these things up. And I think, too, like you said, his 11 categories of transvestism, they're probably meaningful. They're probably things that you and I would recognize as being types of AGP, but they're types of AGP. All of these things are under the umbrella of autogynephilia, and we're actually only moving backwards by trying to separate them into discrete categories where the evidence doesn't support that these are discrete categories.
Right. It doesn't, and I'm I'm all about drilling down in more detail if that's what his framework does. But it's like, but he doesn't explain what it is that he thinks Blanchard missed or got wrong or what's lacking. Yeah, it's just like he's taking it back. But this feels rude to say, but it almost feels like he is not familiar with the actual literature on this phenomenon. He's just made it up based on the presentations he's
like
observed.
That. Yeah, because it's like, otherwise, why would he even use the word autogynephilia? It seems like
without explaining why he's changed it.
Right, or even using the word at all, right? Because he could have said there's the fetishistic transvestites, the non-fetishistic transvestites, and the anatomic transvestites, right? Like,
right.
Or I guess whatever. I guess transvestite wouldn't work in that case if people are desiring to change their body, but yeah, it's like why are you using the word if you're using it in a completely niche, like,
right, a really novel way that you've just that you've just come up with. And he presents it like, no, this is what AGP is, without explaining why. Like, why is this specifically it and not what everybody else understands it? And not just everybody else. He seems to be talking like it's just the gender criticals who don't understand. It's like, no, you're presenting something that's completely novel in sexology. And that's great. And that's great if you have a new theory or a new framework. Explain why it's important and what it's adding that the previous understanding is lacking.
Yeah.
But spoilers, he does not do that.
No. And you're right. Like it's good if you're making different hypotheses. That's a good thing. And obviously, you and I would be hypocritical to say that no one should touch the original writings of Ray Blanchard. We are part of the.
Here's what we think.
People, who are saying based on our understanding of the theory, based on our reading of the research, based on our reading of the case studies at the time, here's what we think got missed. And we're also pointing to modern manifestations and presentations and saying, we think this is being misinterpreted as X thing when really it fits the AGP, and so
just in the new cultural context. Yeah,
exactly. And maybe we haven't done a perfect job demonstrating that. But that's our intention. Our intention is to meaningfully build off of the research where he's just using it as if AGP obviously means this other limited definition that I've decided it means.
Right.
Okay. Ready to continue?
Yeah. Let's keep on rolling.
Okay.
Nation to get inside the woman's space is a bit like social rape because they're fully intact men with penises. They're getting excited, and that's the fetish. And then you've got the fourth category, which is the ROGD kids. These are the kids who suddenly come home from school say, I'm trans and non-binary. And these are the ones that I say are a youth subculture. There's nothing medical or psychologically pathological about them. They are just goth Mark 5. So they just look just like I looked when I was 16 or any punk looked in the 70s. They look subversive, but they're just being cool because all their friends are. And there's this sudden explosion of non-binary trans in schools as soon as one cool non-binary looking person turns up. They haven't caught it like COVID. It's a subculture, but because there's no music attached, we don't see it as that. So those are the four groups as I see it.
Okay, that's fascinating. And there's a lot of questions I'm sure we both have. I'd like to ask you, because there's so many debates happening in, the debates around gender and gender identity and feminism. And I think there's a lot that you said, which would poke big holes in some of the common arguments that we hear online. One of the things I'd love to ask you about is there such a thing as an ROGD boy? And tell us about that profile of kid.
ROGD just means you suddenly come to the conclusion that you're non-binary or trans, and you didn't have any history of it before. And what I've said is, and everyone's sick of me saying the story, when I went to school in the 80s and Jenny turned up, I was doing a podcast recently, and they said that my soundtrack should be Jenny was a friend of mine by the Killers. So I say this story. So when Jenny turned up with back-combed hair and purple lipstick and eyeliner, we're going, oh my God, you're so cool. What are you? You're a goth. Within weeks, the whole of this North Wales public school were goths, and I had vertical hair for until they left me. And we looked very subversive and non-binary, but it was nothing about gender. We're just goths, And my trajectory of goth is it starts off with punk, and Mark 1 goths were the ones who liked the post-punk goth bands like me, Bauhaus. Then Mark 2 goths, they're a bit happier, so they like the Cure. Mark 3 goths were sort of verging into shoegaze territory. Mark 4 goths were emos, where they discovered self-harm. And then Mark 5 goths, because they coincide with social media replacing music, are the non-binary trans people. But because it's no longer about music, social media's taken the role of music. Because in Generation X, it was all about the music. When social media came along, it's all about your social media profile, how many likes you've got, all that sort of stuff. Music, kids now, they listen to music, but they're not as into it as Generation X were. So Goth Mark 5 is just non-binary trans. But unfortunately, they have parents who've seen documentaries on BBC and think that their children are trapped in the wrong body, and they march them down the castration pathway. And like I said recently, castration is the new backcombing.
Okay, that's pretty devastating to hear that, because knowing the parents and the kids who are in the middle of this, they're in awful mental pain. They're really caught up in something really absorbing, and it's taken them over. I wonder, with those Goth Mark 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, did it get progressively more dysfunctional? Or, because these are really distressed kids.
The subculture is all about angst and subversion and fighting back. So in the mix, you will have some angst. And if I was held back from my eyeliner and my hairbrush and my hairspray as a goth and told I wasn't allowed to wear black or look I wanted, I'd be furious. So if you're saying to children you can't have this identity, then they're going to be furious. But because they then conflate it with being trans, and they then look into the whole trans route, and they become that is the subculture. So you're trying to remove them from this subculture, which is actually a medical issue. They fight back. So okay, so there might be distress, but treat the distress. Don't castrate them. That's an easy way out. Saying these kids are distressed, let's castrate them.
Okay, what about a boy who is
making the distinction between males and females is so important in this, because I agree so much with what Az is saying in this regard. I remember when I first listened to his episode of General Wetterlens, I knew a lot less about the sexology, and I was just really impressed with his support group structure with the post-ops and the pre-ops, and that was brilliant. I think that needs to be reinstated. But I was also very impressed by this, the whole goth mock thing, and because so many people don't understand that this is important for the teenage girls or the adolescent females. It is 100%, not for all of them, of course, no, but for so many, it is completely a social movement that they have, align themselves with, and it does have that same kind of self-righteousness and like group cohesion, like being part of a larger collective that's subversive but also righteous in some way, that the whole goth and punk things absolutely did. And it's also very interesting that he pointed out that people aren't recognizing this as the youth subculture that it is because there is no music. And that's very, that didn't occur to me. It's like very good point. It's like so much of these were all centered around the music, and now it's centered around the social media and your online branding and et cetera. And that is all very, very important, that I think a lot of the, parents and stuff trying to make sense of this are missing, is that, it's basically a youth subculture that meets a medical, framework, which is transition. Anyway, but that is not, and this is what Stella was trying to point at when she's like, but some of these kids, some of these boys are incredibly distressed about their bodies, about, their masculizing bodies. What nobody seems to be able to point to here is because these kids are dealing with, when we're talking about the boys, they're dealing with autogynephilic gender dysphoria. They're dealing with autoandrophobia. They are repulsed by their masculinizing male bodies. And it seems so like time is so important to them. It's like the quicker I can get, my estrogen and stop masculinizing, the better. It's like for them, this is an obsession far beyond, I need my eyeliner to fit in with the other goths. It's like that. That is not what's going on here for the boys. For the girls, yes, they need the microdosing of testosterone so that they can, show their, genderqueer bona fides or whatever. That's not what's going on with the boys. And that doesn't seem like what they want to acknowledge or talk about here.
You're right. This is like the one thing that I think Brianna Wu is getting right, even though I think it's for very self-interested reasons. She keeps harping on the fact that males and females are different, that their desires and the cause for their dysphoria is different, that their likelihood of satisfaction with medicalization is different. So she's right about this. And you're right, Aaron. This is something that needs to be discussed. It needs to be hashed out, because when he's talking about how if he was told as a teenager that he couldn't wear his black and his whatever else he said, that he would have a fit and he would lose it and he would feel very distressed. That is true when you compare it to the ideological transitioners, the females, like you said. It's intuitively true in a way that, like, I remember my mom always says, like, you can't tell a teenager to break up with their boyfriend because it's going to push them right into his arms, right? It's like you can't tell an angsty, moody teenager what to do. They don't want to hear it, especially from their parents. So that's probably an apt analogy for the ROGD girls, or the ideological transitioners, if not slightly insensitive to make the comparison that way. But for the males, that's not really an apt comparison, because like you just said, it's a completely different motivation. It's not for them, if I don't do this, then I won't be able to signal to my in-group, and I won't be on the radical edge of the culture and whatever. It's very much like you said, it's like my body is being destroyed by nature right now, and I need to do everything in my power to stop this immediately. And they're feeling they want to crawl out of their skin, right? Many of them might be willing to go to pretty drastic measures. Now, where I agree with him is the answer to that shouldn't be castration. And again, that can be a very blunt and insensitive way to put it. But yeah, it's like we agree on that, but it's not the same phenomenon that's going on with all of these young transitioners. And people really don't seem to want to say that out loud. Why do you think that is? Is it because then we have to acknowledge autogynephilia? Like, why is it?
I think so. And that's
yeah, sorry. No, you go.
No, Garrett, go on with your thought.
I was going to say, like, I wonder if a part of it, this is going to be controversial, is that so many of the public detransitioners are female, and the detransitioners are a huge part of the reason that so many normies have woken up to this and have come to see the gender movement as actually regressive and potentially harmful. And so I think it would be seen as, what's the word I'm looking for? It'd be like going, it's like you're saying that they were the ones that got duped or something, or that, like, by saying that for these males, it might be like quote unquote real dysphoria in a way it wasn't for the females, might seem like invalidating the experiences of these detransitioners potentially. And for many of the detransitioners too, let's say the female ones in particular, but not just, they don't want to make the distinctions between the males and females because they want it all banned, because they see it as inherently harmful, as all of these medical interventions are making someone sicker, and therefore it doesn't really matter what's driving them. Everyone's getting caught up in this. We need to stop it for everyone. Do you think I'm projecting too much?
Yeah, I don't know that it's projecting. I just don't think that that's where, say, Sasha and Stella are coming from. I think it's more from their perspective. It's like that and their audience's perspective is that if we're talking about the detransitioners, is like they are deserving of sympathy and respect. And if we call them autogynephiles, it means they aren't deserving of sympathy and respect, or that they're not seen as victims anymore. They're seen as, perverts and predators, and which is obviously very much not what you and I are saying that they are. But I think there is a hesitation to see the trends happening in the boys and, observe their dysphoria as being rooted in autogynephilia, because so much of in gender critical space, that is just an accusation. It's not an explanation for their gender distress, etc. It's just it's like a brush to be tarred with, or whatever. I'm not sure what the saying I'm looking for is, but yeah, I think they're desperate to find for it to be different than who in gender critical space has long been the villains in this. And I really think that's it. I could be like oversimplifying it or misunderstanding their intentions, but it just seems like so many are just kind of allergic to applying that label.
That makes sense.
To good
Right.
people.
Right. People who they believe are, like you said, are deserving of sympathy. And they
Right.
don't want to withhold that sympathy. Yeah. I think that might be true. But yeah, it is a real problem. And I feel like this is something that you and I have been saying a lot throughout doing this show, but it's like, we're just too far into this for everyone to have such a simplistic model of what's going on.
Yeah.
We're, not we as in myself, but certainly you and certainly Sasha and Stella and certainly us, Hakeem, have been in this space for so long. It does feel like why has everyone's knowledge not progressed or not
Yeah.
sharpened? Yeah.
I think it is because you're hitting that wall where you can't call, the victims the villains, but you can't undo your understanding of who the villain in this whole scheme is, and yeah, brains just run in circles trying to avoid that.
Yeah.
Should we carry on?
We should.
Similar to what you described, a kid shows up in his grade that is identifying as trans. He's a bit enamored by this kid. Perhaps it's a girl who's non-binary and she's kind of hot and sexy and he likes her, and he suddenly is like, well, I could be trans if that'll get your attention. Like very much like what you're describing. What if we also discover, for example, that he's been buying lacy underwear on Amazon and also looking at some porn that has some feminization themes? Some people in the current debates are saying, well, that kid is AGP or has traits of AGP or has nuggets of AGP. And I've said at times, like perhaps these feelings, these autogynephilic feelings can exist on some sort of a spectrum. It seems like maybe that's not your perspective, but analyze that scenario for us in your view.
Okay, so like I said, there's 4 groups. So the vast majority will be youth subculture for OGD. A huge amount will be transvestites and some transsexuals. So within the kids, the male who's dressing up, he might be a transvestite because there may be something that has led him to get excited about dressing up in his mother's or sister's clothes or buying them. So it affords him something. So it's not about it may not about being non-binary or trans. It might be about he's found that wearing cross-sex clothing or clothing that he thinks is cross-sex clothing makes him feel something which rewards him. So he may be a transvestite, and transvestism often starts off quite young. So it's if he's dressing up and getting excited by the dressing up, he's necessarily a transvestite, not an AGP. This is the confusion between AGPs and fetishist transvestites. AGP is overly used. AGP has nothing to do with clothes. It's just getting excited by having a vagina and breast.
Where are you getting this from?
Right. It's like people mix this up. They don't understand AGP is just about the vagina and breast, nothing about clothes. He says it so adamantly, and it's like,
so adamantly.
Dude, you made this up.
Yeah, it's just matter of fact.
Person. Yeah.
And also, like, I mean, it just feels like this would be easy to get at. So, like, did AGPs exist before medicalization? Because obviously he believes that transvestites did.
Right.
Also, if it's just about having the penis, if it's just about having the vagina and the breasts, why do AGPs transition? Why do they dress like women? Why do they grow their hair out? Why do they go on HRT? Why wouldn't they literally go in, get a boob job and a vaginoplasty, and then go back to the lumber mill that they work at? Because it's not just about the vagina and the breasts.
Right.
It's about the desire to be a woman.
Right.
And yes, it can manifest, in different ways with different focuses. But most people, it spans
have the gamut.
All of them. Yeah, exactly. To a certain to one extent, to one degree or another. Or I think Sasha was correct. I think AGP exists on a spectrum. Right.
I do appreciate that he did say, and because I think this is something that the audience of this show needs to understand, is that even though he used the word, fetishistic transvestism, and that seems even harsher to apply to a teenager, but that's what he's doing. He's saying, oh yeah, absolutely, some of these boys are 100%, he's saying they're transvestites, which is, I'm surprised that they didn't of all the things they didn't push back on. I'm actually kind of surprised they didn't push back on that a bit, just because of how that does come across to the audience.
No, that's
true.
But I think Sasha,
just his language is wrong.
And I think certainly Sasha believes that. I think Sasha, based on the videos that she's put out on her own channel, believes that autogynephilia can absolutely manifest in teenage boys. And I agree. I'm glad that he made that he said that. But then again, I should reel it back in because we got to get through the whole video. But it's like, transvestism often manifests in childhood. because they were abused of some sort, like because they had some type of, it's just like when you're
Putting
adding
on
this
mom, taking
baggage
off mom.
on. Yeah. Yeah, right. And it's, doesn't that put like a huge burden of proof on the person making that claim? Like, okay, so you are certain that for all of these transvestites that you encountered, that they experienced trauma of some sort? And then even that is so nebulous because
Right.
people have very different definitions for the word trauma, very different standards for events that they believe can be even considered as traumatic. And also individuals respond differently to traumatic events. And I just
Yep.
don't even understand how these people with these not outside of AGP even, but people who believe that paraphilias are caused by trauma or porn exposure. I just don't know how they, like, how do they explain all of the people who were also traumatized and exposed to porn who don't deal with it in that way? What is different about this group then? Could it be the autogynephilia?
Right.
Like,
right.
Because it's just, that's not a normal or logical. It's not even like, oh, I can obviously see how someone would go down this path because of this experience.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I think what's going on in most of these cases is, I mean, obviously now today we have gender ideology to explain to these boys why they have this weird sexuality that's so confusing. They don't understand it. It's weird. We now have gender ideology explains to them, oh, it means you have a woman's brain. In the past, they had to look for other things. And I think literally when they were seeing, psychologists such as Dr. Hakeem, they're going to be like, okay, well, there's this one time when my mom said this to me and it really freaked me out or whatever. It's like you're post hoc looking for an explanation that could explain this really strange sexuality you have and you don't know how to explain it or articulate it or understand, why you experience it. And so people are going to look for explanations. And I think, some traumatic childhood event is going to be one of those things that people will be like, oh, maybe it was, this thing. But yeah, I think he's just basically, okay, throw out the gender ideology. Yes, I agree with, but let's not then look back at, other things that are, that, again, like you said, in no way explain how A leads to B. It's just, you're just looking for something. Yeah.
Right. Even when they'll talk about like males who have experienced sexual assault or rape. I was reading something the other day and it was like a really good, obvious point that it just people don't really want to say out loud. How does giving yourself another hole to be penetrated in make you safer from rape? How does atrophying your muscles and your ability to defend yourself make you less susceptible to rape? It doesn't. And am I saying that every reaction to trauma is logical? No. But that's like, there's a lot of steps that you're missing there to explain how A leads to B in that scenario. If anything, it makes more sense in the reverse. If you look at females, right, trying to make themselves less vulnerable, stronger, right, not be seen as the vulnerable sex. It really doesn't. It's at least not clear the connection between those.
And actually, when we started transparency, I just had this. It seemed logical that a lot of transition in females is motivated by previous sexual trauma. Like that just kind of intuitively made sense to me. But it's way less. Like I didn't see it as much as I expected to see it. And then like, following up on the like Reddit message boards, if this is not actually as common as you would think it would be. So if it isn't very common, it isn't necessarily all that common in females who are transitioning. And obviously girls are far more, often victims of childhood sexual assault than boys are. It just doesn't make any sense that suddenly there's all these boys who are being, sexually abused as children and then feminizing themselves is the response to that. That doesn't make any sense.
No.
Whereas yes, masculinizing oneself as a girl to avoid that makes sense. But yeah, like you said, it's not always logical, our responses to trauma, but just following the evidence in the what people are reporting that isn't what people are reporting that doesn't seem to kind of serve a self-soothing notion of being feminine and vulnerable. It doesn't really pan out.
Yeah, it's also like not to bring up like TRA talking points here, but it's like, it's easy to say that when you're working with a detransition population. And these are people who might be doing, like you said, Aaron, they're kind of looking into their past to try to explain the transition, I would say, is probably traumatic for some of them, right? It's, and they're looking to understand what led them down this path. But what about all of the trans people who are not transitioning and have no history of trauma? It's like, we don't even look there. And you could say, oh, well, they're deluded and they're in the cult and all of this. Okay, fine. Okay, so what about the self-aware transsexuals who can't detransition because their body's too far gone, but they're ideologically detransitioned and they didn't experience trauma? Like, what the?
Right.
It's just too easy to poke holes.
Yep.
In these theories. And it's frustrating when they're not even trying to present any evidence to support it.
Right.
Yeah.
Not about clothes. So the person who's excited by clothes and excited about getting into women's spaces, women's clothes, women's anything is a transvestite, not an AGP. AGP wants to have a vagina and have breasts.
So you're saying,
want to get into spaces of fetish transvestites.
So you're saying AGP is an anatomical fixation?
Fetish. Yeah, it's an anatomical fetish. So their fantasies are not about them dressing up. Their fantasies are them having a vagina or them having breasts. It's very, very, very rare. Obviously I've seen loads of them, but they're distinctly different from the transvestite. The transvestite is all about the clothing. And in my first book, I described 11 different types of transvestites. You've got the transvestite who fantasizes that they're the opposite sex. You get the transvestite who is excited by not being seen as the opposite sex. So they may have a more masochistic quality to them. So they get jeered at by children, going, "Oh, you're a man," and they may start off feeling emasculated, but then feel empowered as a man because look, these people are telling me I'm a man. I don't really feel like I'm a man, but they're confirming that I'm a man. You get people who have a fetish about the texture of the clothes on their skin. So lots of men have this thing about tights or lace. So there's tons of variants. I identified 11 different subtypes of the transvestite, and there's always been far more transvestites than have been transsexuals or AGP.
But I remember reading about like different types of autogynephiles, and there was anatomical, there was behavioural, there was transvestic autogynephile, and there was physiological, as in they wanted to be breastfeeding or whatever they wanted to be. You know what I mean? But there was the transvestic autogynephile. That's how I read it.
But autogynephile is, you consider it as a subset within transvestism, not transvestism, the subset of autogynephile. So
he has
not read Blanchard.
No, and he has that exactly backwards.
Right.
Exactly backwards. Blanchard's entire typology was that actually AGP is the umbrella, and that while AGP encompasses all transvestic fetishism does not encompass all of the experiences of autogynephilia. He has it literally backwards, and like you said, and like Ray said in his response video to this, he's not explaining. He's not saying, I think that Ray Blanchard, while this type of gender distress, anatomic distress makes sense with autogynephilia, I think he had it backwards. He's not saying that. He's just he just sounds like he's unfamiliar with it. And if he is familiar with it, then he's not doing a good job presenting his argument because he's not making an argument.
No. Stella just outlined it. So these are the 4 different types of AGP that Blanchard, wrote about. And rather than acknowledging that or saying why he thinks it's not the correct classification, he just says, no, AGP is just a small.
And he doesn't even say, no, Blanchard got that part wrong. He says, no, everyone misunderstands this.
Right. Yeah. Everyone misunderstands it because you're the only person who frames it this way.
Not the only person, but right. And it is frustrating because he starts this episode off, right, saying that the GCs, they don't understand autogynephilia, and it's like, well, neither do you.
Right. At least GCs don't understand his version of autogynephilia, I guess is what he's saying. But they also don't understand Blanchard's, but he doesn't understand Blanchard's. And anyway, it's pretty, it's just wild to me that he keeps using that word, AGP, autogynephiles. And like, that's the word that was coined by Ray Blanchard to put forward this. Yeah.
No, wait, I just had another epiphany. You're right. He just hasn't fucking read any of this, because he said in his 11 types that he delineated in his first book, he said one of the types of the transvestic fetishists is that they are turned on by the idea of being a woman. Autogynephilia, the translation of the term is love of oneself as a woman. No, It is not a subtype of transvestism. It is the condition. And so he's literally saying, no. Being an autogynephile is not about wanting to be a woman. It's very specifically desiring to have a vagina and breasts.
Right.
It's in the title, dude.
Yeah.
Autogynephilia literally means the love of oneself as a woman, idealizing oneself as a woman, desire to embody womanhood. It's in the fucking name.
Right. Yep. Yeah, so it doesn't even know what it means.
No, and that it's actually just a perfect encapsulation of the state of trans health, both in the mental health, among the mental health and the medical professionals.
I do want to say though, like, so after I had heard as on the first episode of Gender Wider Lens he was on, I did reach out because I was really impressed with the goth mock stuff and in the therapy group that he had done, and I really wanted to talk to him about that. And we were trying to schedule, like he was really happy to come on. We were trying to schedule a time, but then we kind of, I can't remember, the time we were working for didn't happen. And then I'd kind of dropped the ball on it, and I reached back out, probably would have been a few months after the fact. And I'd become much more knowledgeable on Blanchard's work by that time. And I think I had re-listened to his Wider Lens episode, where I'd somehow become reacquainted with his like the stuff that he was talking about. And I specifically said, or I basically, tried to reschedule the interview. And again, he was like, oh yeah, absolutely. We're talking times. And then I said, I specifically want to talk about why your definition of autogynephilia, like where, it's diverged dramatically from Blanchard's. I want to talk about basically where you developed it or how you developed it or why you diverged. I can't remember exactly how I framed it, but I was clear. It's like, I want to talk about why yours is so different from Blanchard. And he stopped responding. I never heard back from him after that when and it could just be, again, like we dropped the ball in the previous scheduling conversation. It could have just been like, things come up, you forget about whoever you're Twitter DMing about a potential podcast. But I am wondering is like, did he doesn't actually have an explanation for why his framework is so completely different from Blanchard's. And does he even know what Blanchard's is? And listening to this, I'm pretty sure the answer is no, he does not. Which is, depressing.
Yeah, it is really depressing. And it's like he cites that one, was it a case study maybe from the 70s, right? About this non-fetishistic transvestite. And it's like, okay, so you're going back in the literature. You just skipped Blanchard. And I get, again, on a human level, we're all susceptible to this. There's an element of confirmation bias, right?
Sure.
We're more ready to accept things that align with our preconceived notions or our beliefs. But it does just seem like, like he's just not familiar with the literature on autogynephilia at all. And then it just makes you wonder, then literally, where did you get the word?
Right.
Like, when did you bring this term into your formulation?
Lexicon.
Even?
Yeah. And, where did you encounter it? And why did you just decide it means specifically just this thing?
Right. Yeah. And again, to a certain extent, like, if he knew, well, I don't entirely blame the clinicians who are unfamiliar with autogynephilia, because they're not required in any course, in any type of education, to study sexology. They're not required to look at the history of the literature. They're not required to do any of that. But if you're gonna start hypothesizing,
he dedicated
about
his
things,
practice.
right?
Yeah.
Right. I'll continue.
The fetish of womanhood would be in transvestism, and for those for whom it's not about the clothes at all, but just having the body parts, is AGP, which you can either academically argue whether it's a subset within fetishist transvestites or a separate grouping, but it's a much smaller grouping than the massive transvestism. But we don't talk about transvestites anymore because the activists want to give weight to the trans debate, and by enlisting a huge horde of people that are irrelevant that happen to be wearing women's clothes helps them.
Sorry, even just this idea, like, he's right that the modern trans label is glomming together all of, well, I'm gonna say all of these disparate experiences. That is essentially true. It is putting together people with autoandrophobia and ideological 40-year-old women, right, who are super woke and progressive, and 12-year-old girls whose entire friend group. But this idea that like transvestites were never part of this conversation, that's just not true, right? We've said this on the show before, but the old joke, right? What's the difference between a transvestite and a transsexual? About 3 years.
Right.
It's always been the same population. We just know this, and we know this from self-report of transsexuals, people who take it all the way, who have a history of erotic cross-dressing and testing out estrogen and living a secret double life and all of this stuff. These things are absolutely part of the same phenomenon. I think that's where I get frustrated also with the people like Brianna Wu, right, who are insisting that it's these cross-dressers who have taken over and blurred the lines. And it's like, no, what the cross-dressers being allowed in women's spaces does is just highlight the kind of unscientific basis, or it really highlights the legal fiction that we had been participating in as a society for several decades. But this is not actually an infiltration of some separate community. Right.
Yep. They needed to be the separate distinction for their own the Brianna Wu's, for their own validity. They needed to be a separate classification. But I do wonder what Dr. Hakeem's motivation, like, why does he need them to be these very discrete categories? It's like, oh no,
right.
the fetishistic transvestite has absolutely nothing to do with the anatomical AGP who wants breasts and a vagina, and they are absolutely not turned on by women's clothing. It's like, why are these such discrete? Why does he need them so forcefully to be these really ironclad? Not there's no crossover between these groups. It's just, I understand why Brianna Wu feels that way, but about her classification. But
and by the way, that's how I also feel about the people who want to make big distinctions between AGP and AGAP. I feel like it's just not that discrete. Like there are meaningful differences sometimes, but like, especially, I just think like it's an effort to kind of make one more real, one more valid. It's also partially, I think, an effort to make one more like clinically indicated, when unfortunately my feeling is that it kind of shouldn't ever be clinically indicated, that people should have access to it, but that it shouldn't be treated like something that we can meaningfully test for and treat. So I do think that's also sort of just a really wanting to. Now, you ask an interesting question: why is Dr. Hakeem invested in making these distinct phenomenon? Who knows? I mean, it might just be like he was making the different groups when he was just looking at transvestites, right? And so this could just be like someone who likes to organize and categorize, and you and I fall into that category too. But it is interesting. It feels like it's going against the evidence to claim that these are all distinct categories.
Right.
And he says like, oh, well, you can. There's an argument to be made about whether AGP is a subcategory of transvestism or its own thing. But okay, well, at least make that argument.
Right. You haven't thought about that, or you haven't even laid that out yet. Yeah.
And it's like, and he doesn't include the third thing, which is what is actually true to the theory, which is no, transvesticism is a subtype of autogynephilia and not the other way around. He posits like two other options. Well, AGP might be a separate thing distinct from transvestism, or it might be a subtype of. He doesn't even contemplate that AGP could be the umbrella.
Right. Right.
Yeah,
because he's already been very, very adamant that it's just the small rare version of it. But no indication as to why.
No.
Talking and just.
Well, I will ask you, you were working in the field for many years. Remind me, what years did you start working?
I started in 2000. And everyone's saying, "Why on earth are you interested in this area?" I was going, because nobody's thinking about it. This is madness. And what I came to realize was the madness wasn't located in the individual. The individual was confused, a fetishist, autistic, or had trauma. The madness was located in everyone around them, their families, their employers, society. The madness is the response societally we have to them.
Good for you.
Why do you think that is? Is it because it's so, sorry, Stella, do you think it's because it's just so hard to understand that people revert back to these kind of platitude statements like trapped in the wrong body or whatever? Like, why do you think society is so vulnerable to just having a superficial understanding of these phenomena?
I think it's because of the vociferous backlash and because they've got themselves protected by piggybacking on another group, gays, lesbians, and bisexuals, who have earned through hard work their protective status. So almost like a cuckoo in someone else's nest, Stonewall and whoever implanted T onto the LGB surreptitiously by sleight of hand, and then so they piggyback on all the social political understanding that we have about sexuality, whereas it's not a sexuality apart from the fetishists. And so people daren't sort of critique it that way. And also, if you think about the transsexuals, not the transvestites, the transsexuals, because my argument is all male transsexuals are autistic, so they typically are, quite sort of intelligent in other ways, and they are prone to having autistic meltdowns if you don't agree with them. So a bit like the autistic child.
Okay. There's so much there. First, I'm going to respond to this idea that the TQ came in and secretly tried to hang on to the coattails of the hard-earned rights of the LGBT movement. It's not that simple. I don't think that framing is true. And I think it's quite a self-serving framing that I hear a lot from gay people. It is like, we got our rights the right way. And it's the sort of like, we are more virtuous and they were just trying to cling on to what we did.
Like you said, it's not a sexuality except for the fetishists, but you just said the vast majority of them are fetishists. What?
Yeah, right. And also, I'll make this quick because I've said this before and I don't want to derail too much, but while being gay or lesbian is different from being trans, they are part of the same community. There is a tremendous amount of overlap, whether that's because a lot of these people identify as gay or lesbian or are behaviorally gay or lesbian, or because they're gender nonconforming and so are gay people oftentimes. This is a naturally occurring group. I know people, the LGB drop the T people like to believe that it's not, but I do believe that this was a natural alliance. I think there's truth to this idea that the gay rights orgs who were now paying people salaries, right, needed something else to focus on when gay marriage was legalized in the United States. So I think that part is true. And I think that can happen. That type of incentive structure can lead to bad things in many different domains. But I don't, it's a very self-serving telling of the recent history to say that it was these like amazing gay people who won these rights and then these evil fetishists who tried to tack on the back. I don't think that's really how it happened. And I don't know. What do you think?
And also the LGB drop the T thing makes no sense, because if you're keeping the B, you're keeping most of the T's. Like, I mean, come on. T is not this. I mean,
they're not ready for that one, Aaron.
Yeah.
No, that's true.
True.
Then he does this. He talks about. I think this is what's frustrating too. He talks about the transvestites. He kind of talks like a based TRA. Like, he's making these distinctions between transsexual and transvestite, not in a material way, as in a transvestite is someone who cross-dresses but doesn't medicalize, and a transsexual is someone who medicalizes. He's making it like these are discrete demographic, inherently, right? He's saying the transsexuals, I've come to find, are all autistic.
Right.
So transsexual is some innate status, which doesn't that kind of go against what he's saying with this idea of like...
I think he interchanges transsexual and AGP. He's saying...
No, I don't think he is. No, I don't think he is.
I think when he's saying transvestites, he means the fetishistic cross-dressers are the transvestites. This is almost like the old vernacular. And then the transsexuals are those who seek SRS, and those he calls autogynephiles. So I'm pretty sure he's interchangeably using.
I don't think
that.
so, only because he claims that AGPs are such a small number of this group.
Right.
And he's saying, and he obviously knew a lot of transsexuals because he ran a clinic. So I don't know. You're right. I might be misinterpreting, but he does. I don't think he's using transsexual as synonymous with AGP.
Okay. I'm starting to wonder, are his classifications even that coherent? Are they that, is he being consistent in the language between transsexual AGP? Like, does he, if those, it does seem kind of like he kind of chooses his words kind of willy-nilly almost, if that's the case. And hasn't really defined, he has a very strict definition of what AGP is, but then he just seems to, well, I don't know. Yeah, let's keep digging in. But before we pass on, you may have more had to say as well. But yeah, just that all of them are autistic. So that's really incredible, especially because back in the time, they get into it later, the time that he's actually running these support groups and working with doing the one-on-one therapy, that was before the autism diagnosis boom. So that's really, like, when he says that, does he mean all of them had autistic traits or seemed very, Aspie or whatever, or did all of his patients have autism diagnoses, whatever? I think that's a really important distinction, because if it's the latter, if they all had autism diagnosis, that's really incredible considering, this was over a decade ago.
Because you put it like that, I would imagine it's the former, not the latter, that he's talking about autism in the same way that you and I talk about autism, which is this general, broad, autistic Asperger phenotype.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, again, autism is it's a tough one, because like people mean different things when they say it, and it's
like
not
narcissism.
Yes, and it's not we don't have perfect diagnostic criteria, and we don't have a full understanding of like what are the mechanisms at play. But yeah, it is just, it's kind of fun that he says this, that all the transsexuals are autistic, because this is the thing that
like every
all
single
of the
one.
Yeah, like us neo-sexologists, the neo-Blanchardians, have come to the conclusion that a big piece of the puzzle that was missing from the original framework is this autism, this broad autistic phenotype that was certainly not being diagnosed. You weren't being diagnosed with autism in the 1980s in Toronto unless you were extremely low functioning.
Right.
And so what Blanchard noted was that they were all these, funnily enough, they were all of these computer programmers. And these nerds, these awkward
really
nerds.
Smart, socially awkward. Yeah.
Right. Which is essentially what we mean, or what I mean a lot of times when I'm talking about this autistic phenotype.
Right.
So even though I think Dr. Hakeem is playing fast and loose with his and categorizations here, it's interesting that he's also noticing this, though.
Right. And I'm glad he spoke about it. It's just like, but as an actual doctor in this field, it does seem kind of irresponsible to use that term the way that we use it.
True.
We're these amateurs. We can just be like, oh, that's totally Aspie, and we can what? But if he's using the word, oh, they were all autistic, without actually having,
you might need to back that up.
right, yeah. Whereas I can say on Twitter, oh, they all seem autistic, and people are like, "Where's your proof?" Like, well, where's his proof that these are?
And then I just say things like, "Look at their hands; they have autistic fingers," which I swear is a thing. Yeah, no, that's a good point. And I mean, also this just reminds me too of like, I think the first data we really had about females, the ROGD cohort and the autism stuff too, came out of the UK. Came out of the NHS data, that a certain, I think it was like 30 to 40% of.
I don't remember, but I just remember it being much lower than I actually expected it to be.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I remember it shocked me. It was high. But again, then it just, I guess we'll keep watching, but it's like, where is he going with this? Because then some people, sometimes there's a, I don't know what the best way to talk about the autism connection here is, right? Because some people go straight into infantilization, which I don't think is helpful. But there's also a worthwhile conversation to be had about, like, what is it about an autistic mind that lends towards this rigidity and maybe black and white thinking and whatever else.
Yep.
Yeah,
it's definitely worth exploring. It's I think they do explore it a little bit here, but yeah, let's see how much more we can burn through.
Who, the fish fingers are touching the baked beans, have this massive screaming nuclear fallout emotional response. You get that with autistic people. So if you're seen to be not going along with what they want, they have this massive autistic meltdown, either in the street or in your face, or by writing lots of angry letters to everyone and making everyone's lives hell. So lots of people have learned from that not to even go there because they want an easy life and they don't want to have loads of complaints and stuff. So over time, that's what's happened.
The fetishistic transvestites, from your point of view, they seem to be the most kind of problematic to society because they're trying to gain access to female spaces, if I'm right.
Well, there's two problems. The autistic transsexuals are problematic because they're vociferously angry. They write lots of emails trying to kill everyone off that's dared not agree with them, and they get people cancelled from their jobs. And
he just described Andrea James.
Yeah.
Okay.
All that sort of stuff. The autistic meltdown transsexuals are a problem, but the transvestites are a problem because they try and use whatever they can to try and get into women's spaces, rapaciously invade women's spaces by the pretense of being a woman, whereas they're men with penises and testicles, and it's obvious that they're not, but they get something out of being in those spaces. We've all seen the videos on Twitter of these sort of very self-satisfied transvestites who are gloating about getting into the women's changing room and getting very sexually excited. This triumph over that. So that's the problem. So there's problems from the transsexual and the problems from the transvestite society.
And what about the non-fetishistic transvestite? How are they doing in society, and how are we managing
They
them?
They don't want to draw attention to themselves, so they either do it at home without going outside while doing the vacuuming, or they just do it quietly, and they fear being seen, and they try and do it surreptitiously. So it's the more fetishistic ones that are more that get more excitement and want to sort of invade.
As it sounds like, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, so you tell me if I'm getting this wrong, but
Invade.
Right. And also, but he said, oh, it's the fetishistic ones, or what was it? I'm not sure what the question was that Stella asked, but she was trying to get him to delineate these populations, and he's like, oh yeah, well, it's the non-fetishistic ones who just do it at home, or while they're doing the vacuuming. It's like, do they do what? Fetishistic cross-dress is what you're alluding to. But then he's saying, oh, it's only a fetish if they're invading women's spaces, but if they're just on in a maid's outfit and doing the hoovering at home and no one sees them, then that's not fetishistic.
No, and he's actually giving a lot of, he's giving some cover to the anti-Blanchardians, because he's sort of making this distinction that if your cross-dressing doesn't culminate in a masturbation session, then it's not fetishistic, and it's not even sexual, and it's not even related to sexuality. And so it's these non-fetishistic ones, this is just for comfort. This is soothing. Right. And by the way, it is, but it's also comforting and soothing to the transvestic fetishists, and it's also comforting and soothing to the AGPs. And a lot of it has to do with novelty and how long they've been doing it for. And yeah, he's trying to.
A lot of it is libido level. A
lot of it is libido level.
It's also the autism component playing a role here is how socially tuned in they are. So if they're not particularly self-conscious due to their autism, they're going to be, as he says, invading, just because it might not occur to them that it's inappropriate. And also the ideology is, of course, telling them they have the right to be. It's there's so many different personal, cultural, and certainly, libido level. If you're, just dressing up like a woman because, you do it every day and it makes you feel, happy, content, relaxed, whatever, and you're not masturbating to it, that means it's a completely different phenomenon to the people who are still turned on when they do it. It could just be down the line, like you're saying, exposure, it diminishes the erotic component.
I wonder if he would make this distinction in the context of a different paraphilia.
Audience?
No.
Oh.
Paraphilia. So like ABDLs, adult baby diaper lovers. There
Okay.
are the ABDLs who are very open about the erotic aspect. And there are ABDLs who say that I do this to self-soothe, to comfort, to unwind. Do you think he would say that an adult dressing up in a diaper is not fetishistic? Do you think that he would make those neat distinctions for other very similar erotic target identity inversions? Maybe he would. So I don't know. I'm doubtful for some reason, but maybe he would make that distinction. But then again, it's not a very scientific distinction to make.
No.
And it seems to either rely too much on self-report, or he's not asking these questions because he wants to, because of sort of confirmation bias. Like, did you really get down to the nitty-gritty with these non-fetishistic transvestites about what's going on in their mind when they're doing this, about if they've ever had maybe they're not masturbating. Have they ever had an erection, even an involuntary one, even one that they don't want to do it because they don't want to be a creepy fetishist, you know? It's like maybe he's not, and maybe they're, and again, I hate the line that like AGPs lie, but people lie, humans lie, especially when they're being observed, you know,
especially about their sexuality, and one that's unusual.
Especially about their sexuality, yeah.
And he does seem to just, it'll be evident later on in the interview, but he does seem to just completely overvalue what people are reporting, like they self-reports, and it's like, oh well, they thought this because they said this. It's like, they may have been just telling you what they think the appropriate response is, and or what's going to give them quicker hormone prescription. It's like, they don't tell the truth,
or what they believe honestly and truly, right, exactly, how they have come, because that's the thing too, is like, even when we talk about again, AGPs lie, AGPs retcon, all people do this, but it is a natural, this analytic part of our brains, right, is like what sets us apart. And so all humans try to make sense of their experiences, and they want it to be have continuity and consistency. So they do try to make again, I've said this was like our first episode, was like my the first time I really thought about my autosexuality was trying to understand where my same-sex attraction came from. Like, we all try to make sense of our life, and when I was trying to make sense of my same-sex attraction, I also considered things like my mom wears the pants in my parents' relationships. Like, we all do go to these sort of psychoanalytic, we reach back into our childhoods, we try to make sense of our life. That doesn't make it true.
Right. It's the story that we have concocted, that we've used to make sense of our experience, and now we're telling it to this professional who's just like, oh, okay.
Right. And we don't necessarily need to like burst the bubble of every person who believes an untrue thing about themselves, but we also shouldn't reify it. Even this, again, I think we're kind of reifying this idea, not we as in you and I, but it seems like that we're reifying this idea that trauma causes paraphilias and stuff like this. And I just don't think that we have good evidence for that.
No, we don't. But yeah, it's that post hoc explanation for things we need an explanation for. Carry on.
Yeah. I was just going to say something controversial, but.
Oh, do it. That's what we're here for.
You're not allowed to ask these questions about homosexuality.
Right.
I'll just put that there.
But it sounds like you've described these categories in a way that, I know your work reflects years and years of seeing patients, and so you're noticing patterns, but it sounds like you're saying these are are these intractable, innate aspects of the person? Are these things, can they change over time? Are they amenable to treatment? And does the culture impact somebody's interpretation? Like, I'm imagining, the non-fetishistic transvestite at home vacuuming in a dress, but then maybe coming across a news story or a Reddit thread and then going, well, maybe I can take this outside. Like, are these things amenable to change from the environment and things like that?
Totally. I mean, my service was individual and group therapy. I found the group therapy to be by far the best because the therapy was by everyone in the group, not just by me. So you had people, they all thought they were in the wrong sex, apart from the detransitioners, the regressors who knew they weren't. And they were able to compare and contrast and critique each other from coming from a similar yet different stance and challenging. And we're going, hang on, that doesn't make you a woman just because you're doing this. Or hang on a minute, you're just getting excited by that. So that was far more powerful. And they would come to the group with very gendered ideas of what life was, a bit like being French, where everything is le or la, and they would talk about things being masculine and feminine, not just the obvious things, but everyday items would be masculine or feminine, or how they did or said things. And that was critiqued by each other. Going, this is ridiculous. What do you mean you did this in a masculine way? You did that in a feminine way? And my premise in the group was there's no such thing as gender. There's biological sex. Gender is a social construct. It's a bit like religion. You can invest as much or as little into it as you want. But if it becomes problematic, don't let it ruin your life. Just de-invest from gender and just be you and be whatever you want to be without thinking you're breaking any rules. The autistic people were really slavishly adherent to rules, because autistic people are. And the transvestites were excited by the rules, and they were sort of excited by transcending them. I talked to my patients about gender confident and gender underconfident people, and the gender confident people were just normal people who thought, well, these are your frameworks. I'm going to subverse them. If you think I look female or you're not sure, then that's your problem. Whereas the gender underconfident people were really trying to learn all the rules and abide by the rules in this sort of autistic way of thinking. Therefore, a woman is this. Because
Sorry, that was just so funny because right when you came back into the frame, Stella looked up to the side and she looked at you on the screen right when you walked back in. I just wanted to say quickly, it sounds like the distinction that the transsexuals, he is using, I guess, the same term, or he's using it in the same way that we would, which is these are the ones who kind of go through with the medicalized transition and live as the opposite sex. But I think he's just saying basically it's the autistic people out of these groups who become the transsexuals, because he's saying that all the transsexuals are autistic. And he seems to be making a distinction between them and the transvestites. But so I wonder if that's what he means, that it's like the autistic people of all of these subgroups who become the transsexuals. And again, I'm just frustrated now because if the fetishistic transvestites need their penis and having a working penis so that they can masturbate is so important, then how did they ever get into your group seeking medicalization?
His group was made up of those who were seeking surgery and those who regretted it. But and I think that's the support group that he put together of existing patients. But he also had patients that didn't go to the support group, as I understand it. They were maybe, the ones not seeking actual surgery. But I do think he's just kind of, like I said before, interchangeably using these words without really laying out which population he's talking about. I don't think he's being specific.
No. And Sasha just made an excellent point, right? That someone who starts off cross-dressing at home while they're vacuuming and then gets online and sees that other people have had a history of this experience too, and then they transitioned. So and now this person now suddenly is really fixated on having a breast and a vagina. Did they transform from a non-fetishistic transvestite to an AGP?
Right. And he doesn't answer that question. He doesn't explain like how one can move in between his different categorizations. He just starts talking about the people learn from each other, but doesn't say if they transcended the categories after learning from one another.
Right. And how meaningful are these and maybe the reason that you can move from category to category is because they're actually subtypes of one experience, right? And not actually discrete.
Yeah, they're culture, personality, found different manifestations of the same phenomenon. I'm going to mute eating my crackers. I'm hungry.
Okay, I'll press play again.
What I found is, for my transsexual patients, and I've seen so many, not a single one could convey to me what they meant by feeling that they're the wrong sex. They would only ever talk about descriptions of external appearance, because for the autistic person, they struggle to work out the internal mind of someone. They struggle enough with their own. So whenever I said, what is a woman? Well, women have long hair, they have lipstick, they have makeup, they have dress. No, that's what they look like. What is it? How do you know you're what is it? Oh, well, I'm emotional, I like cooking. No, that's the behavior thing. What? And they couldn't, not one of them could say what it was to be a woman or vice versa, a man. They would just talk about stereotypic behaviors or what they look like, which of course isn't. So it's almost like blackface or imitation. And if you can imitate to the point that people believe you're that, therefore you are that.
Could I ask you, as you know, the way you're living in the UK and it's post-caste, and there's kind of a struggle for a kind of a power grab going on between the two camps. It looks like, for me, it looks like that. If you were in charge of the service, what would you do? What
Just
you know? Yeah, go on. Tell us what you would do. What would you actually do?
Because there's no system. What, for kids or for adults?
Gender. Yeah. How would you manage trans issues?
Because gender doesn't exist. So we've invented this condition, which is a false proxy solution, which people are asking for, and the outcomes, which nobody knows because nobody follows them up. The outcomes depend on how autistic you are. So if you really believe that all a woman is someone with long hair, makeup, and wears dresses, and you do that, and you really believe that people see you as a woman, then you may be happy. But the less autistic people, they began after some years to realize, actually, there's more to a woman maybe than this, and people are realizing that I'm not a woman, and that's when they regret. So there's different types of regret. Yeah. So this is, I'm finally coming around to what Sasha asked me originally, but I said that.
He just kind of touched on ideological detransition, which is something that I don't know how formally we've talked about on this show. But there do seem to be differences in people who detransition or regret. There's the people who maybe have really negative surgical outcomes or something like that, that like really just complicates their quality of life and their ability to pass and all of these things. And then there are the people who realize, like Dr. Hakeem is saying, that you can't actually change your sex, right? That people aren't necessarily going to see you that way, who come back to sort of a reality-based view of transgenderism. And some of those people detransition and some of them don't. I mean, Aaron, you're a perfect example of someone who came to that conclusion and didn't detransition because you're happy with your life as it currently is.
Right.
But yeah, also this idea that what determines whether someone comes to that conclusion is how autistic they are. It's not a very scientific way that he's using using that metric here.
No. Oh crap! I lost my train of what I was wanted to comment on. Oh well, I'm sure it'll come back to me because he says a lot of the stuff like. Yeah. Anyway, sorry. I'm sure it'll come back.
No,
to me.
you're fine.
So you've got the transsexual who isn't that autistic, who then realizes some years later that they've gone from gender dysphoria to transgender idealism to transgender euphoria to transgender regret, and they start off with a sense of inauthenticity about their own gender, and they end up with a sense of inauthenticity about their new gender. So that's one sort of regret, the transsexual regret. The transvestite the autogynephile regret is the excitement, the sexual excitement from.
So he is making a distinction between transsexuals and autogynephiles and transvestites. So who are the transsexuals then?
Yeah, I don't think there is any consistency to. I'm sure in his book
I guess the transsexuals are the autistics who transition. So it's not, maybe that's another group. There's like the AGPs who want a vagina. There's the fetishistic cross-dressers who get off socially raping women. It's such a obscene way to talk about it. There's the non-fetishistic transvestites who only want to dress up to vacuum. And then there's the autistic people, and those are the transsexuals. It's not maybe he does, like you said, go into more detail in his book, but it's not a very coherent.
There's no coherence.
No, it's not a coherent way to talk about it.
Doing all this is gone as soon as they're castrated, and they wake up going, what have I done? I don't want this. So unfortunately, a lot of the autogynephiles I saw were ones who had thought, okay, I need a sex change because I'm obviously thinking I'm a woman because I'm so excited about this. They didn't sort of clock that their excitement was sexualized, even though they were masturbating furiously at the thought of having a vagina. And they didn't want to wait, 2 years for a gender clinic. So they got themselves on a plane. They went to Bangkok. They booked themselves in for surgery, and they woke up. And immediately they woke up, they regretted having a new vagina fitted. And that's the classic regret.
Were those patients on T blockers and estrogen for some time, or not necessarily? Because I mean, even that is a chemical castration, which definitely tips the balance of like, how arousing is this? So that's interesting too. Tell us about that.
So some were, but some weren't. One of my patients said, I wanted to become a woman the way that God made them. And God gives girls vaginas before they grow breasts. So I want to get a vagina and then take hormones and grow breasts. So that was his logic.
Wow.
And one of them said, he wasn't sure. He thought, am I doing the right thing? I was playing to Bangkok, and he got there. And he said to the surgeon, look, I'm just not sure. Am I doing the right thing? And the Bangkok surgeon said, look, I've booked the theatre now. You're going to have to do it. And so he felt so bad he did it. we work at regressing. I mean, obviously that person hadn't gone on the communication skills course that medical students now go on.
Jeez, that's devastating. That's devastating.
I remembered what I wanted to say before is back to that whole overvaluing what patients are reporting about themselves. Like that whole, oh, what makes you think, or what makes you think you're a woman? Is like, oh, I like being at home and doing the housework. And so that's what women do. Or I, like wearing lipstick and having long hair. So that's why I'm a woman. And he's like, oh, that's, basically such a shallow and just dumb view of the difference in the sexes. But no, what actually is going on there is these people, in my view, are incredibly psychologically, emotionally drawn to the idea of being a woman.
Mhm.
They are very emotionally invested in believing themselves to be innately feminine in some way, and they have to externally communicate this to a professional, and that's their lame attempt at doing that. Is like, oh, well, I feel this way, or I feel like I should be this because this and this. It's like they're just looking to something that they can offer you as an explanation. And I'm sorry, but you as the professional working in the space should be able to tell them, maybe it's because you're autogynephilic. Maybe it's,
Right.
these are where these feelings come from that you want to justify it. But he's not doing that. He's like, oh, they just thought if they wanted to have long hair, that meant they were a woman. They just need to learn that that's not what a woman is, and they'll be fine.
No, exactly. Well, and this is where gender critical 101 fails when it comes to autogynephilia, which is the majority of people who are transitioning, right? Because there's this belief that if you just tell, and I believe this is what piqued me, was like, holy shit, gender ideology is actually regressive. We went from born this way, girls can be tomboys and boys can be feminine, to like, holy shit, if you have masculine interests, you're actually a boy. And so there's a lot of people, gender criticals, who, and just like well-meaning normies and whatever, right, who believe that if you can just explain to these people that all of these things don't need to be gendered, right, and all of this stuff, that they'll just snap out of it, but they won't. And it once again shows that they don't have an understanding of autogynephilia, and that they haven't read Ray Blanchard or even listened to him give interviews. Because what is one of Blanchard's, I always mess it up when I retell it, but this idea of like the buttons, he has said one time that like, if the reason that autogynephiles point to these gendered differences and say that this makes them is because the sexes are different, and there are all these differences for them to observe, and they are, like you said, they're drawn to these things. Maybe they actually believe that they are naturally effeminate, whatever. But this idea that if we could just get, even this idea of people who are like, oh, well, we just need to make society less gendered and then people won't transition. No, because sexes still exist. And Blanchard said once that if the only differences between males and females was that females wore 3 buttons on their shirt and males wore 2 buttons on their shirt, autogynephiles would stitch on the 3rd button. Because it's not actually about overvaluing stereotypes. It's about overvaluing female. I mean, that's also a simplification, right? But it's this idea of really wanting to be the opposite sex. It's not wanting to play with girl toys. It's wanting to play with girl toys the way girls play with girl toys. It's wanting to be the opposite sex, and it's really not, even if it manifests using stereotypes, right? Or things that are accessible to people in culture. That's not the basis of their dysphoria.
Right. They're getting it exactly backwards here. They're saying, like, so the autogynephile is saying, or feels like he desperately needs to be a woman, wishes he was a woman. He's noticing that women have their hair long, therefore he wants to wear his hair long. And so doing these external cues to manifest the self-concept of femininity or being a woman, they are specifically there to manifest that feeling of being a woman. So when someone comes along and says, oh, well, you can be a man with long hair, they're completely misunderstanding why the autogynephile wants to have the long hair. And if you say, oh, women can have short hair, they'll be like, okay, great, I'll be a woman with short hair. You know what I'm saying? It's like, it's not, they're complete. If you say that, oh, men can have long, you've neutralized the entire reason they want to have the long hair in the first place. It's not, yeah, they're looking at symptoms and thinking it's the the root. I don't know.
Yeah.
Not sure if I'm articulating that well.
No, but yeah, I totally agree with you. And then another reason that I paused, I'm just really this idea that all AGPs are just furiously this is what he said. He said they're like furiously masturbating, yet somehow these imbeciles don't know that they're going to be depressed when they lose their penis. You don't actually understand this cohort in the way that you are claiming to. And I think I wonder too, it's just like, that's not a compassionate view. It's not a compassionate take, especially if you are like, do you have any, I need to rein it in, but like, that's not going to be very welcoming for anyone to come now to seek out your help, your assistance, especially someone who knows that they're autogynephilic or something like that, or even if they don't use that word, who knows that they have these proclivities, right, is aware of that in themselves. That's just a shaming tactic. And again, it's detached from reality, because I don't think that most autogynephiles who are going to the point of SRS, booking a vaginoplasty, most of those people are not masturbating every day. It's just not.
And they've probably been on HRT for a significant amount of time too, et cetera. It's already had a dampening effect on their libido, their even ability to get an erection. It's just
and
it's interesting because
he's feeding the true trans thing to a certain extent. Well, they're autogynephiles or fetishistic transvestites because once they do the surgery, they wake up with regret. No, they don't all wake up with regret.
Right.
It's just it's not actually what's going on.
He says that he got into this work because he wanted to understand the psychology, that brings people to to the decision to transition, but it doesn't seem like he actually does want to understand it. He wants to classify it and tell them why they don't need to do it. He doesn't seem to actually have an empathetic kind of holistic understanding of the experience. And worse than that, he seems to be talking about many of them with like contempt. So it's not just that he doesn't really get it. It's like he doesn't. It's like he's kind of hostile to this population.
That's my impression too.
Does not look good. No,
it really doesn't. And again, it's an extra shame when there's so few clinicians who are even aware of autogynephilia, for the limited pool of people who are aware of it to be talking about it in this way. It's disappointing.
We've heard a story. I can't remember who it was, but somebody told us a story of like being in the operating theater or whatever it's called, and just like feeling a lot of doubt. Was that Forrest, Stella? I can't remember who it was, but anyway, and they just felt like, well, I'm here, I already paid or whatever, like this very almost like logistical reason to do this massive thing. Oh, okay. So then what are you noticing in terms of, you raise autism, and I'm curious, obviously there's overlap. Like I've certainly worked with patients that have touches of all these categories, I think. And you go ahead.
Sorry, so I'm not going to waste my turn, am I? It's an ADD. So the really autistic transsexuals are veering towards the asexual, so they don't really get sex. It's this icky thing that other people do. So those definitely are not overlapping with the fetishists because it's nothing sexual at all. They don't really get why people have sex. If there's an overlap, they'd have to be very mildly autistic and more the fetishistic ones. So those are an overlap, and also the overlap between the fetishistic transvestites and the autogynephiles. So the ones who seem to have the better outcome are the really autistic ones, and for them it's not a sexual thing. The ones who have the worst outcomes are the ones who are either not very autistic and transsexual, or the ones who are actually transvestites or autogynephiles.
What about?
Sorry. First of all, there's already a contradiction from how we started this episode off, which was that these are actually distinct phenomenon and that all the people yelling AGP when they see a transvestic fetishist are getting it wrong. And then he's now talking about the bleed between these categories. So I don't get it. And again, it's frustrating because he's actually getting, he had, back to what I was saying earlier about how I would be interested to see his 11 types of transvestites, because there's probably like meaningful presentations there. Like I'm sure he actually has a lot of experience with this population. And he's right that there is a segment of transsexuals who are pretty autistic and very asexual. That's because their sexuality is primarily autosexual. They don't have normal allosexuality. And again, he just is not familiar with the AGP literature at all, because the asexual autogynephile has been present since the beginning of the presentations. This presentation was observed by sexologists before Blanchard. Oh God, what I'm about to say is mean. And I should humble myself, because I'm sure I'm guilty of this in a million ways. But like, he talks with the confidence of someone who doesn't need to be, who is not burdened by the research. Like, it's very easy to be confident about something that you just found out about. I don't know. Again, I'm he didn't just find out about any of this stuff, and it's not like truly new to him, but he's got like all of these strong opinions that don't need to be complicated by the historical literature on autogynephilia or transsexualism or transvestism. It's like he's coming to it all for the first time. I guess that's what I'm trying to get at. It's like there's like a sort of zeal there, right? Like, well, actually, what nobody knows is that for a bunch of these really autistic transsexuals, they're actually asexual. No, we do know that. We do know that. And it's called autogynephilia. Yeah.
It's like his only frame of reference is his own subset of patients from 15 years ago, and then what gender critical Twitter is saying. Like, that's it. It's like, these are this is the knowledge base.
Yeah. And again, he's right. There are transsexuals out there who really don't get the sex thing. They are pretty much asexual, but he's not entirely understanding. He's trying to almost attribute that to the autism, which is, well, I
think there is a connection there. I think.
Do you think there's a connection between autism and asexuality, or autism and autosexuality?
Oh, there's a connection between autism and autosexuality, but for sure. But what he's calling asexuality, we know of as alloeroticism. It's lacking external attraction.
Yeah.
And I do think that's tied to autism. Yeah.
I completely agree with you, but I don't think he's not framing it as an alloeroticism. He's framing it as asexuality, which again, it's like, right. Whereas like, I know a lot of autistic people who are, if anything, they're sexually uninhibited in some ways that are atypical for others. So I completely agree with you. I think it's definitely related to an alloeroticism, but is it related to asexuality? I don't know that we have any evidence that like low sex drive is related to autism or something like that.
I think quite the opposite, actually.
Right, exactly. Especially just anecdotally. Yeah. Oh, okay.
Homosexual, transsexual. Where do they fit on all this?
Yeah, so there was some of my biological male and a lot of my biological female patients, and there was I talk about the risk factors are internal risk factors is one's own autism, and the external risk factors is the homophobia that you may find yourself in, which you then internalize.
What about the classic, the Ray Blanchard homosexual, transsexual? How do you classify them?
I had there's an autistic person I was assessing, and I said, but you're a biological man, and you're sexually attracted to men, so surely that just means you're gay, doesn't it? And he said, no, I'm not gay because I don't like gay bars and gay clubs and gay music. And his understanding was to be gay meant you like gay clubs, gay bars, gay music, and I don't like that, therefore I'm this. And that was the autistic way. I was saying, it's not about the music. And he couldn't get that it was, he said, I don't like that lifestyle. It's like, well, so.
You said something earlier. I think you said all male trans are autistic.
All male.
His one, potentially, as he's trying to frame it, HSTS patient was autistic. And I think we already feel like those two things do not seem to coexist. But he's basically saying, this person didn't think that they were gay because they didn't like gay music, like, gay clubs, gay culture. So it's very easy to determine, well, if you're exclusively attracted to other men, you're just gay. It doesn't matter, what the culture, the music, etc. is. But it's like this person was trying to explain why he wasn't a man, like why he wasn't a gay man. And the reason is because he feels intrinsically like he has to be a woman in order to be with a man, because that is a fairly, common AGP presentation of, the meta androphilia. And I think this person, that patient was probably a clear example of that. But Az is basically saying, oh, why can't you just see that you don't have to like these gay typical things in order to be, just a same sex attracted man?
Mhm.
Can't see that it's because.
Yeah. He's also trying to make it seem as though, or it sounds like his analysis here, and he's not unique to having this analysis, is that it's the autism makes people so susceptible to this type of black and white thinking, right? And so he's saying, well,
Right.
this was his gay brain, not this was his autogynephilic brain, but this was his, I'm sorry, not gay brain, this was his autistic brain saying, well, if I don't like going to clubs and hookup culture and music and this and that, then I'm not gay. This kind of goes back to the question that you and I have asked many times without very satisfactory responses. How does that lead to I'm going to go get a sex change?
Right.
Like, why wouldn't like the first step be like, then maybe I'm not gay and I should try being with women? And I'm not saying that that's what this person should have done, right? But it's like, how do you get from I don't like gay culture to I'm going to surgically alter my body and change all of my legal documents to live as a woman? Maybe
Right.
it's not just gay culture, right? That this person is averse to. And it's sort of like, then you should have been able to change this person's mind, theoretically, right? If this was just a gay person with shame about gay culture, then you should have been able to change his mind by saying, look, there's plenty of gay people, show him look at this gay person who's not flamboyant, or, look at this. I just don't really see the straight line from I don't like gay culture to I'm going to have a vaginoplasty.
Yep. There is no straight line. But it's just so especially fascinating that in all the years that he worked, like you pointed out, for the NHS,
right,
that was the one patient who he could point to as an example of what everybody assumed
is the
predominant
majority.
patient.
Right.
Is the HSTS. But
let me reiterate
exist
that,
in the West even then.
Because I think I said it in a piece we might cut out, but right, he was working for the NHS, and so there's not the same self-selection process as you might have for some type of private clinic or something like this. This is just like any citizen, right, in the UK, in that area, who is experiencing this type of distress and considering medicalization would go to see him and would have the opportunity to join his group. I'm sure that depended on space and things like this too, certain logistic concerns. But yeah, theoretically, his population that he was pulling samples from was just any dysphoric person in the UK. And in a decade plus, he only met one who would maybe fit the bill for HSTS. And it sounds like the only bill that he fit was self-report androphilia, self-reported exclusive attraction to men, it's actually also quite interesting that he didn't see any other, even just like meta-attracted AGPs. So that's sort of interesting in and of itself too. But yeah, it actually is really noteworthy that he only came across one.
Yeah,
and you and I are not convinced that this person was actually HSTS in any meaningful way.
Right. But yeah, that's a very good point that you made. He seems to be under the impression that the vast majority of them were just typical, like externally heterosexual. I wonder, bisexual. I'm wondering how. Yeah, what he understands the distinction.
Me too.
With asexuality, bisexuality, etc. In the trans cohort, but should we play a little bit more? They go a little bit more into the. I mean, we kind of decided to not do the entire video just because there is kind of a lot of repetition, and we already covered the meat of what we wanted to respond to. But it sounds like Stella was about to drill into the whole autism thing.
Transsexuals, not transvestites, all male transsexuals. Okay. So I looked at my population sample over the years I was doing it, and all the males were and they I wrote down some quotes of what people had said. Finding it really.
And not all the females.
No, the females. So the things that people would say were, I'm not a man because all men have short hair and wear suits. I want to have long hair and wear interesting clothes. Someone else said, I was in Body Shop and I chose the grey wash bag and not the pink one. That was a woman. I like planes and cars. Therefore, I must be male. I don't like football or sports. Therefore, I should be female. I'm in touch with my emotions and I like looking after the home and cooking. So therefore,
Okay,
he's a female.
pause
I
it
prefer
here.
company of women or men. Delete is appropriate.
It is just again more of the same. Yeah.
No, and you're right though. He's completely inverting the order of events here. They're not saying I like these things. This is level 1 gender critical. As you hear, people are saying, this person likes these sorts of things, right? Well, then that means they're actually, the opposite sex. He's getting it wrong. These people want to be the opposite sex, and so they're pulling out these things as evidence, right? Well, no,
100%.
I really want to be a woman, and look, I'm already like a woman in so many ways. I don't even do sports. I'm into artistic things. I'm very sensitive, right? They're not literally. While I want to reserve the possibility that there are some people with such extreme dialectical thinking, right, that it literally is like, well, if I don't naturally like this thing, then I can't possibly be a member of my sex. That might exist, but that's not what's happening for the majority of these people. They're not just noticing sex atypical traits. They desire to be the opposite sex, and they are using these sex atypical traits, whether those are natural or things they're drawn to, right? They're using this as evidence to communicate to the world, to prove, so that maybe you'll let me do it, right? Look, I'm already like a woman, already like a man in these ways, but it's not actually those individual traits that it's not playing in the person's brain as, well, this means I couldn't possibly be. It's more of a post hoc rationalization when they bring up these traits. That's not actually where they started. That's not where their desire to transition started. No one decides to transition because in shop class they were attracted to the gray bag instead of the pink bag. No, someone who has decided to transition looks back on their life and says, wow, in shop class I didn't even pick the pink bag. Like, I've always been like this. He really has the order of operations wrong here, I think.
Right. Yeah. And he also needs to remember that these people are trying to convince him of this thing being true about them, Right.
He's the gatekeeper.
Right. Yeah. And so it's like, these people just have such simplistic reasoning. No, probably not. But like, this is how, they're manifesting what they already want, pointing to very specific, traits or behaviors that they can, look to validate that and to convince you of it. And
they might think that those things like are really also what makes that, right? But again,
Absolutely.
Those things that they're picking those things out to explain and to express their distress.
Right.
Those things are
They're
not
not
what triggered them into.
I'm a woman because I play Minecraft 15 hours a day. It's like, that is probably very true of them, but they're not thinking about that facet of their life because it's not beneficial to what they want to communicate about themselves. They're going to look to whatever they can to validate, to confirm what they want to believe about themselves, what they want you to believe about them,
and to make sense of their experience, to make sense of this strong desire that they have, because it is like, it is. I think OCD is very often the wrong framing for this, even though obviously someone with dysphoria can also have OCD, but it really is this like this compulsion. People really do feel compelled to feminize or to masculinize, and then they look at their life and try to make sense of it, try to explain why they have this drive, because they don't know that the drive is actually from autogynephilia.
right So they're just as much making sense of it themselves, genuinely, because the professionals aren't there to tell them what's going on.
Okay, so that is our sort of angry analysis on the Dr. Hakeem guest episode on Gender: A Wider Lens. Like we said, check out the episode, watch the whole thing, watch it for yourself, draw your own conclusions, but let us know what you think. And we will be back soon with more riveting analysis about autosexuality.
We will. I do want to say, just for the record, I'm so sorry to Stella for how we paused this. And also good job to Sasha and Stella. They were asking some great questions. They didn't always get like really, answers to their questions, but they were.
Yeah, they asked questions from an informed perspective. Yeah. They were very literally citing, citing the literature, and it's disappointing that they didn't get the answers that they were looking for. But
yeah.
that's what we're here
Good
for,
job.
obviously.
Yep.
All right,
Thanks
thanks
all.
everybody.